I discovered 3 leaflets about EMS products while rummaging around in the archives, and it was a bit of a coincidence because I just made a video about the EMS synth in a suitcase. Card up there, link in description if you want to check it out. Now, EMS is probably most famous for its Synthi suitcase Synth, but it also made other synth products. And I'm willing to bet that of these 3 products, which I'll show you now, I reckon you probably weren't aware of at least one of them, or if you were, you had totally forgotten about it. And it's quite an interesting product. At that, we'll get into it in a minute. Now, I'll scan these leaflets so you can read the small print if you wish, but first, let's have a quick look at the 3 leaflets and the 3 products. This is the VCS3, which is probably the most well-known of all the EMS products. It's a single-page leaflet, but there's information here. This is the Vocoder, the EMS Vocoder. This is the Vocoder 2000. I think there was a 3000 released at some point. And this is the Soundbeam, and what's really interesting about this is that the Soundbeam is still in production, although a much more advanced version than the one produced by EMS way back whenever that was. More about that in a moment. So this is the VCS3, very similar to the Synthi and the AKS synth and suitcase. I did get over my initial disappointment with it, and I do find this very interesting and very intriguing. I seem to have scribbled a couple of prices on the leaflet. I'll say a little bit more about that a little later. And here's the other side of the leaflet. You can pause the video if you want to read this in detail. For a synth produced in the early 70s, it seemed to be very well specified. So this is the Vocoder leaflet, very interesting design. EMS were known for their interesting adverts. I don't know if anyone remembers the advert which said every nun needs a VCS3 or a Synthi or something like that. So they put fun into synthesizers, or at least synth adverts. And this is the information side. This is the Soundbeam. It seems to have come from the pen of the same designer. And this is the information, well worth a brief glance if you are interested in alternative music controllers. So, were you familiar with all these 3 products? I suspect if you know a little synth history, you were familiar with the Vocoder, but did you remember the Soundbeam? I had totally forgotten about it, and according to that fount of all information, Wikipedia, it has actually gone through 6 iterations, and it is still being produced today. I shall leave a link to the site if you're interested in checking it out, but I'll also leave a link to a demonstration video on YouTube which shows some of the things it can do. Now, I think the Soundbeam is currently being marketed towards people with disabilities who aren't able to physically play a keyboard or a guitar or a musical instrument. It's also being used in live performances, and although I haven't tried it, it looks massive fun. Now, none of the leaflets contain a date. Yes, freeze frame. This is the voice of your friendly video editor. Now, while I was editing the video and looking at the blown up version of the scans, I did spot what seems to be a date, the 1st of the 1st 87. If that is true, then much of what I go on to say in the rest of this video will be out by 10 or 12 years. I just wanted to put that out there so you can see what a fool I make of myself during the next few minutes. But with that caveat in mind, let's press on. The VCS3 and Synthi synths were released in the early 1970s. The Vocoder 2000, I think, was released around 1976-1977. Now, it is possible that I got the VCS3 leaflet before the other two, but the other two contain similar designs. So it looks to me at least that the Soundbeam was around in the mid to late 70s. Now, according to Wikipedia, the first Soundbeam, Soundbeam 1, was produced in 1989. So I don't think perhaps they are exactly the same product. Now, although Wikipedia gives credit to EMS for the Soundbeam, it could be that the Soundbeam 1 it mentions was the first Soundbeam produced by the new Soundbeam project. That would make more sense to me. If you have any definitive information about the release date and the price of any of these, then please do let me know. I have to say I'm also a bit puzzled about the prices I seem to have scribbled on the VCS3 leaflet. According to previous research I done mentioned in the last video, it seemed that the launch price of the VCS3 or the Synthi or the Synth in a suitcase was around maybe £500. Now, according to the scribbles, which I think is my handwriting on this leaflet, it suggests that they were in the £1,000–1,200 region. So, unless the prices had tripled, it's quite possible that either I was wrong or my initial source was wrong. I really don't know. If you have any definitive information about that, then I would be really interested to hear about it. So, the vocoder. Who doesn't love a good vocoder? Now, although the technology was quite old, it was developed for telephone systems, I believe, but the EMS vocoder was one of, if not the first, depending on which source you look at, it was one of, if not the first vocoders to be produced commercially. But again, what's interesting from Wikipedia, there were several versions. There was the Vocoder 1000, the 2000, the 3000, and then I think it jumped up to the 5000. The 2000, I think, is the most well known. The 3000 was almost identical, but you had individual volume controls over each of the bands. Now, as with a lot of this old synth gear, if you want an original version, it will cost you an arm and two legs. Erica Synths came up with a new version of the Synthi, and Behringer is supposed to be working on a clone of the Synthi at a very low cost, so that will be really interesting as when and if that ever comes to fruition. If the cost of a vintage 2000 vocoder is a little much, then you can get a software emulation. This one is produced by XILS. Is that how you pronounce it? I leave a link to the site, of course, along with everything else in the description if you want to check it out. So that's my quick walk down EMS memory lane. Do you remember these three instruments? Did you have, or perhaps still have, one of them? If you've enjoyed this video, maybe you would like to consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the bell. Thank you. So you get informed of new videos as soon as I release them. It's all about synthesizers, electronic music and stuff like that. And if you have enjoyed this video, I think you might enjoy these videos as well. Thank you as always very much indeed for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.